Hello third year historians and welcome to the first full lesson from our slave trade topic, which is our new National 5 topic for history. So again, really important that you have the notes for these accessible because you will need these as well for next year, so make sure that you know where they are. Put the heading, how did the slave trade begin? And you're going to have a think about what we're actually going to be able to do in this lesson. So ultimately we want to explain why tropical crops were important in the development of the slave trade, and we're going to think about why people were taken from West Africa to the West Indies to actually be used on the actual slave trade plantations. So again, you don't need to write the learning intentions, just put the heading somewhere so you know where to find it and you can start the lesson. So your first assignment for this week, there's going to be two, is this quick quiz, which is going to be up in a quiz format on the team for you to answer the questions for. You're going to use the next couple of slides and the rest of this lesson to kind of write the answers for it down or to know what your answers are going to be, and then you'll be able to put the answers in to the quiz and click submit for that particular assignment. You can write these in your jotter if you want as well, just so that you know what you're kind of doing as you're going through the next couple of slides. So the questions that you're looking for the answers to are: which two continents did Europeans not know about? Why did people use so many spices 500 years ago? Where did these spices actually come from? How did they get to the UK? Why did the supply of spices to Europe end suddenly? Spices couldn't grow in the Americas, but what could? Why did Columbus end up in the West Indies? And what do you call large-scale farms? Last question you're looking for is, apart from sugar, what else was farmed? So 9 questions that you're looking for the answers for in the next couple of slides. You might want to write these questions down and then write the answers as you go and then just transfer it, that's fine, but use the next couple of slides to help you answer these. So where did it all begin? At the beginning of the 18th century, which is kind of the Middle Ages period, that's where we are talking about the slave trade really starting. People generally thought that the world was flat at this point in time and that ships would fall off of the edge of the world if they sailed too far round. People had no accurate, only really very basic maps at this point in time, and the known world was based on Europe and the Mediterranean Sea sort of regions. Most of Africa, America and Australia had actually not been discovered yet at this point in time. Suddenly, the Turkish Empire, which had also been known as the Ottoman Empire, expanded, and they managed to gain control of the Middle East, and the fact was that as a result of this, they cut off Europe trading with Asia. Something obviously had to be done about this, because Europe had done quite a lot of trade with Asia. It was really important for them, and they needed to work out a way to actually get access to these goods that they were no longer able to get. So in the years between 1497 and 1499, Portuguese Vasco da Gama discovered that he could take a route to India by sailing around Africa to get to the areas that he actually needed to get these particular goods. The types of goods that they actually wanted at this point in time were things that they needed and spices that they needed for flavours and for food back home in Europe. So by working out that he could sail around Africa, this unknown place, which was quite a daring thing to do at this point in time, he could get these goods that they actually wanted. These goods were spices. People in Europe depended on the spices to flavour food, especially things like meat, which was quite heavily salted, and drinks like wine, which were spiced. This was part of preserving them, because remember, no refrigerators and things like that at this point in time. These spices were utterly impossible to get in the European countries, so because wages and population in the UK had increased, more and more industrial revolution things, more jobs, people had a lot more money, and they demanded things like sugar, cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, these things as well. All of these spices came to Europe from the Far East, so India, China, the Spice Islands, either they came over land or partially by sea. It wasn't only spices though. For the most part, honey had actually been the only local source of sugar to sweeten foods at this point in time. So sugar was actually a really huge thing for people in Europe. It was referred to as white gold because it was something that was kind of seen as an unknown principle, something that was really, really important. It helped preserve food, it helped to hide the sort of taste of this kind of like rotten meat, which was quite a common thing. At this point in time, coffee and things like that were starting to be brought in, and it was very bitter, and people worked out that this would help with bitter tasting things as well. Really, really important. People would also quite often just chew like the actual raw sugar cane for something to actually just eat. It was a huge important thing for them, and they were demanding it more and more because they had more money to actually spend on these goods. This means that we need someone to actually go get the sugar and go get these spices. And this is where Christopher Columbus comes in. He was actually not totally convinced about this flat earth idea. He was convinced the world was round, and that actually he could reach the lands that they were trying to get to, India, China and the Spice Islands, instead of sailing east where they would encounter the Ottoman Empire and be attacked, by sailing west. He had this idea that if he sailed west far enough, he would come all the way back around the world and he would reach India from the other side. So nobody really listened to him for a while, but then in 1492, Isabella, Queen of Spain, decided to give him money to buy 3 small ships in order to actually see if his theory was correct. He named them the Nina, the Pinta and the Santa Maria. So he set sail. After 6 weeks on the Atlantic, they actually did manage to spot land. Now, it was not India. It was an unknown continent that had never been found before, but he had gone west looking for India, so he started to refer to these lands as the West Indies, because that's what he'd been looking for. It's not very inventive, but that's what he'd been looking for, and that's what he decided to call them. It's a new world in what we would now know as kind of the modern day Americas, or the sort of the islands off of America, and that's what he manages to find. So this is the way he goes. The original route from Europe is this red line here, which he takes, and he goes right around here. He doesn't quite manage to go all the way around, and he hits here and discovers this piece of land. He then works out that goods can actually be grown there, so he sails back to Europe and he starts making multiple journeys kind of around these regions to the different islands in this area. He does work out that the spices the Europeans wanted did not grow particularly well in these regions. However, the white gold, the sugar, really did. It could be grown as a cash crop, which meant it was grown for profit, and it could be grown really quickly and really effectively and sold for quite a lot of money because the demand was so high. Most of the European trade actually would use sugar, so it became a really very valuable commodity really, really quickly. Settlers from Spain, Portugal, France, England and Holland all started to colonise these West Indies islands. They set up tropical crop plantations, which were like large-scale farms, so that's the name we give to large-scale farms, tropical crop plantations, and they decided that it was a perfect place to grow this cash crop and make a fortune and make a lot of money. It also had great potential to be a place for white settlers to live, and that's what they started to do. So it's just sugar. Well, actually no, it's not. At this point in time, coffee houses are also starting to emerge, which were used as meeting places for men, where businesses could be discussed, politics and things could be discussed in quite a lively manner, but the coffee powder and things that they were using were actually very, very bitter. They also needed coffee to actually be served there as well, so we've got sugar being used quite a lot in these coffee houses, as well as coffee itself being used as well. Then from about 1750, you've got cotton cloth being produced from the slave plantations, creating a massive amount of jobs in the UK as well, but really important. So cotton becomes another good that they're transporting. But it wasn't just the UK who benefited. Sugar production in Barbados, for example, accounted to about 93% of the island's exports, which meant that that was the main thing that they were actually trading for their economy. It was an awful lot of money coming in, which meant that island became very wealthy very, very fast. So, this is your quick quiz, remember? Okay, these are now the answers that you should have. If you're not sure, don't worry, go back, double check it, listen again, and fill in this information. You might want to write it down and go back to the assignment tab and do it, or you might want to go do the assignment just now, pause the video and then come back for the next part of the lesson. Okay, so now we're going to kind of just recap and summarise the information that we need to know about the importance of the tropical crops. What you're going to do for this is you're going to make a copy of this grid and then you're going to summarise the information on the next slide in order to fill it in. Now we're not going to write all of the information, we're just going to kind of take the key points so you have a really nice grid at the end of it. If you're not a grid person, you can do it as bullet points, that's totally fine, or if you would prefer it as a mind map, you can do it that way as well. It's entirely up to you how you choose to structure it, but you're going to need to have some key bits of information. So set up however you're taking your notes and then move to the next part of the lesson to fill it in. So sugar, coffee and cotton was difficult to grow in Europe. Okay, that's a key kind of point that we need to say. Before the 16th century, Northern Europe's only local source of sugar was honey. People were attracted to the flavour as they were used to food that was often tasteless, sour and rotten. So we're going to say Europe's only local source of sugar was honey. People were attracted to the flavour as they were used to food that was often tasteless, sour and rotten. Sugar would help preserve food. So it was a valuable commodity, so it's quite a bit we're writing here. 16th and 17th centuries, improved standards of living led to growing populations and economic change in Europe, towns and cities, which increased demand for sugar. So we can say here the 16th and 17th centuries, improved standards of living, growing populations and economic changes increased the demand for sugar. So we'll take out the other words there. By 1750, sugar surpassed grain as the most valued commodity in European trade. So we'd need that bit there. Coffee houses, which served hot brews, were also used as meeting places where men could do business. So we're going to say coffee houses were used as meeting places for business and politics. From 1750, the production of cotton cloth emerged mostly imported from slave plantations. This created jobs in the UK. So we could say from 1750, the production of cotton cloth from slave plantations, so those words there, created lots of jobs in the UK. So that's really important. Sugar was grown as a cash crop, which meant that it was grown for profit, and due to this, infrastructure improved in the Caribbean, e.g. improved transport links, new roads and railways. So we could say sugar was grown as a cash crop, which meant infrastructure improved in the Caribbean. In Barbados, sugar amounted to 93% of the island's exports, very much needed for its economy. So we could say Barbados sugar amounted to 93% of the island's exports. Okay, so pause the video, fill in your grid, your mind map or your bullet points, whatever you've decided, and then come back to the next task. So we've worked out that these plantations and all of this thing is really important. Who are you actually going to get to grow it? Because we need to have farmers or people on the plantations to do all the planting and the harvesting. So we've got a couple of options. Option 1, the natives of the West Indies. These were referred to as Arawak people. Okay, that's who they were. Now, they were really treated really cruelly by Spanish people who had come to these plantations and tried to use them, but found that they were actually not much use. So they died, pretty much as a result of the horrible conditions that they were being treated to, the fact they were not used to how labour intensive this farming was, the fact that their homes and things had been destroyed by the plantations, and the fact that Europeans brought disease with them, generally just kind of made their lives hell, and unfortunately that particular group of people died. So that is not going to work in terms of our options here. Option 2. Native Americans avoided capture basically by running into Western America, so they're not any use either. Option 3, use Europeans. The work that they did was too backbreaking, it was too hot, so they start to resist, and there's the problem with kind of resistance there, but also they're not used to the tropical conditions and they catch a lot of tropical diseases and they die, so they're not any use either. Running out of options, we then have criminals, people that are brought in from Europe, especially from the 17th century Scotland, producing kind of regular supply of workers, and they would be freed once their sentence actually ended. This was a great plan, free ticket to Barbados, where you're sentenced to 10 years hard labour and then you're free and you could live in Barbados, and the money you've made on the plantations would pay for a nice new house and things as well. Except the conditions are horrible, the weather is too hot for you, the work is too difficult, the tropical diseases kill you, and basically most people die before they've been there for about a year or two. So that one's not going to work. Option 5 is the bond servants. Bond servants are people who are brought in from Europe and they're given free transportation to the West Indies under a contract, about 4 to 7 years. Their argument is they work their contract, they get paid, and they can save their money, they get free passage, and then once their contract is up, they are now free to build their homes and live their lives. Absolutely fine. Again, similar to sort of the criminals, but they're not there for punishment, they're choosing to be there, but once you've entered into the contract, you can't get out of it. The problem is hot tropical weather, horrible conditions, labour intensive, bad tropical diseases, so they die. So these options are not actually working for the plantations and the harvesting. Growing sugar is very hard. It's a very labour intensive job. It takes a lot of manpower. You've got to continuously, constantly weed it. It grows really quickly, but that means that you've got to be on top of it all the time. So between planting and then harvesting, and then it's got to be processed, it takes a lot of people, and they need workers for this to actually go forward and work the way that they need it to. So none of these options are going to work. They've killed the natives with European diseases and horrible conditions and too much work. The Native American people that are left, or the West Indies people, die and run away, so there's no use either for people nearby. The Europeans that are coming are resisting or dying from tropical disease. The criminals are the same. The bond servants are the same. So they have no options left of who they're going to use. The solution to all of this? Some European countries had African colonies. So the idea was, why don't we bring in the West Africans to do this work? There's loads of advantages to using these Africans as work slaves. The first is they're used to the hot climate. They have farming skills, so they can do it. They're less likely to die from European diseases because they've already had contact with those people. There are large numbers of them available. I mean, it doesn't matter that some of them are going to die on the journey because they can just be replaced because there's loads of them. Slavery already existed in Africa. It was a tradition in the Ashanti tribe, for example, which is in modern-day Ghana, that slaves were taken as captives if their enemies lost during war and things like that. And they were able to actually take them as slaves, and therefore that meant that if the Europeans rocked up to a tribe leader and asked to buy a slave, there were slaves available for them. And they would sell them quite easily, quite happily, because that was part of their culture. So many African leaders were happy to sell these Africans who had disobeyed tribal laws for goods like guns and things like that, and that meant they could actually fight more wars to get more slaves to trade for more weapons and more guns, and it becomes a kind of bad cycle for Africa at this point in time. Morally, Europeans actually don't see any problem in enslaving the Africans. The church even said it was actually fine. They had their own plantation and their own slaves, because in their mind, the coloured people were not actually people. They were the white man's burden, uncivilised, and it was necessary for white people to take them and civilise them. And this was the best way for them to do it. For a lot of white people, they genuinely thought they were saving these African people from tribes and voodoo and all these scary animals, and giving them a purpose in life which they wouldn't have had if they were just left alone in Africa. So they're not going to die from tropical disease. They're not going to die from the heat. They're not going to die from the labour-intensive nature of the work. They're not going to die from European disease. It's okay to take them. There's lots of them. They can get them really easily for cheap, trading for guns and weapons. It is a perfect solution, and that is what they decide to start doing. So we're going to summarise this information into either another grid, another mind map, or another bullet point list, depending what you did last time. You might want to try something different this time, because we're going to work with different note-taking techniques, but if you know what works for you, stick with that. So our heading is explain why people were taken from West Africa to the West Indies, and we're just going to do the same thing again to summarise this information. So here's our information, our key things. So we've got demand for sugarcane growing across Europe, so they are definitely needed. It was very labour intensive and many people were required, and the Europeans did not actually want to do it. Arawaks, who were used originally, died out due to disease being brought, such as like smallpox and things like that. Criminals and bond servants from Europe would eventually be freed, so they wouldn't last very long if they actually survived. Already trade connections with West Africa, and the African tribe leaders would trade slaves for weapons, so easy to get. Many Africans were captured, kidnapped, or were sent through punishment from the Ashanti Empire. They were used to a hot climate and had the farming skills. There were large numbers of Africans available, and the Europeans saw no harm in enslaving African people, and therefore it was okay to do it. Okay, so your second activity for this lesson is a documentary for you to watch. The link is on the team and in the YouTube playlist. What you should do is download a copy of the worksheet, and as you're watching, you fill in the worksheet with the answers and upload a copy of your worksheet or a photo of your answers in your jotter as your assignment for this lesson. Any questions or any problems accessing anything, put a message in the team, ask your teacher, ask someone who's in school, or send an email and let us know how you're getting on.